So next I'm going to introduce Dave. So Dave was previously the Chief Executive Officer of the Alpine Shire Council in Northeast Victoria, where he led significant reform initiatives underpinned by a strong focus on innovation. He's passionate about delivering better and lower cost outcomes for our clients and the wider Victorian community. Dave is responsible for the operations of the Victorian Auditor-General's office and acts as the Auditor-General in his absence. He oversees the financial, performance, and technical audit business units. Dave is going to take us on a very interesting deep dive through our journey of data analytics, data science, and data protection. Please join me in welcoming Dave. Sure.
Excellent. Quick switch over of the lapel mic. Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Bill. As Bill mentioned, I'm going to talk through our data analytics journey today and some of the data protection environment that we've developed to underpin that. And I guess there's a lot of talk around machine learning, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and I'm going to talk through how we apply that. And essentially, the same as any private sector firm out there, we are under pressure to deliver you, ultimately the people who pay for our audits, a more efficient, more effective audit outcome with ancillary insights. And the way I like to think of it is, this is what we see the auditor of the future looking like. When I showed this to Ben Jiang, and Ben is the brains behind all of our data analytics work yesterday, he said, "Who's the $6 million man?" So for some of the younger people in the room, here's an alternative. So what I'll talk you through is how we, as I said, apply data analytics to deliver a more efficient, more effective audit with insights, and then part of what our future vision looks like. But before I start into that, it's worth looking at our audit process. Now, of course, auditing is the key thing we want to do, but the reality is, like every process, there is an immense amount of manual labor involved. So if you look at the planning phase of our audit, we do things like request data from you. You extract the data, you upload the data, we download it, we manipulate it, we reconcile it, we map it, and then we get into planning analytics. But of course, we're not doing this just once a year per audit. We're doing it at interim, and in our larger clients where our data analytics focuses, we're doing it at 2 interim visits. We're also doing it at final. And of course, we're not just doing this manual process across a single phase of the audit or a single cycle. We're doing it across expenditure, we're doing it across payroll, we're doing it across revenue, and to a lesser extent, assets. So you get a sense of how manual our process is before we even get to auditing. And of course, we're not just doing this for one client, we're doing it for many clients, 550 in total. So what you get a sense of is how incredibly involved our process is and how time-consuming it is before we even get to do our core work. That's the old way of doing things, but this is the new. So what Ben's team is doing, and I should say Ben has got a demo here later today of all sorts of exciting things to look at. One of the things he shows is side by side a single part of this process that optimistically would take an hour, how we can now do it in under 3 minutes. So the new process, there is nothing, because all of this is entirely automated. And I guess I start to exercise my mind as to why is audit so late in coming to the party. And I guess what we're seeing is a huge amount of automation over the last 20 years along this financial continuum within organizations. But as we start to look to audit as an external function delivered by ourselves, that level of automation has not necessarily occurred yet, which is why it's such fertile ground for us to be able to focus on data analytics. Probably not that dissimilar to the way in which the ATO is now, of course, compelling every organization to push data to them. We're in the same space. And how we achieve this, Andrew talked earlier on about the potential for a single general ledger. Well, in the absence of that existing, that's absolutely what we have done. We have, regardless of client, so if I zoom in here, regardless of who the client is, regardless of the system, we use a thing called, I should jump back up, we use a thing here called the VAGO Capture and Transformation Engine. And that effectively means we rely on every client to push data actively to us without manual intervention. And of course, why we can do this, and our key strategic advantage versus the private sector, is we've been around for 150 years. Most of the organizations you represent have been around for a similar period of time, which means unlike the private sector that has to invest in 5-year sort of return on investment cycles, we can invest significantly for the longer term. So this transformation engine is the key to what we do. And what the transformation engine does is it maps all of this data into what we call the VAGO single system, which means regardless of the source of expenditure data, payroll data, revenue data, asset data, it all ends up in a single normalized data system. This is quite incredible in many respects, but because it means we really have almost a single ledger for those clients that are in scope at this point in time. And I should say, we are looking at the top 35 entities, the material entities that we audit for the first phase of this project, but we will rapidly expand it. So covering off on how we use technology and innovation to capture data, to transform it, of course the critical part then is we talk about this augmented auditor, the $6 million man. And I should say the $6 million man is probably reflective in some respects of the investments that we are putting into this program. It will be in the order of $6 million over the entire term of the program, and in an organization of $45 million, it goes to show how core this is to our business. So the end result of all of this is our auditors are equipped with an immense amount of power. They can start to do substantive analytical procedures, computer-aided audit techniques, all of their audit processes, substantive testing, etc., immediately. And this is the type of dashboard that they are presented with. Now, we have 4 phases to our audits. We apply data analytics across 2 of those phases heavily, the planning and the implementation phase. We've recently launched a new audit methodology led by Andrew. It's called EPIC, which stands for Establish, Planning, Implementation, and Conclusion. So in the planning phase of the audit, of course, our directors, our engagement leaders use their acquired audit knowledge and experience to understand where they want to focus. But straight away, immediately, they're able to do something that they could never previously do. They're able to compare across cohorts. They're able to look at universities as a group. They're able to look at local government as a group, and they're able to spot outliers. And in this example, in this cohort group, what we see is a low-volume transaction, low-volume, high-value transaction standing out in the top left corner. Now, typically, I think what you'll gather from how I'm talking is our process involves a lot of back and forwards with the client, distracting your staff from, of course, the productive work that they need to do. What this enables us to do is to really cut out that backwards and forwards, be it in the acquisition of data or the analysis of data. And what we straight away see here as we drill into this transaction is this is a water corporation, and it's a single bulk purchase for the year, which requires no further investigation. Then as we start to look at things like classes of transactions, we see with this client, again in the planning phase of our audit, what we start to observe is a high level of expenditure coming through journals. So what we can here do is look into the transactions associated with those journals. I won't go through all the detail of it with you, but essentially what we start to see is that there are accrual journals that are likely to be reversed prior to the year end. Again, at this point, no further action required. So I move to then how we use dashboarding in our financial audits at the implementation phase of the audit. And one of the key tasks we have to do oftentimes is recreate revenue transactions, be it in the water space, how we recreate water revenue, local government rates revenue, or in this case, universities, how we recalculate student revenue. Now, there are hundreds of parameters that go into determining what a university charges a student. But through our understanding, and Ben has led this work previously in Queensland, we know those 8 to 10 parameters that the model is sensitive to. So what we can do is we can recalculate what student revenue should be for the entire population, and in this case here, the vertical line shows the outliers, which again can be investigated. I could go on with example after example. This is comparing base pay to annual pay, or to annual leave, and again we see an outlier. But I'll talk about one final example. These two top examples we call substantive analytical procedures. The bottom one here is a CAT. It's called Benford's analysis. I'm sure a lot of people in the room will be familiar with this. The light blue bars, Benford essentially determined that numbers appear not with uniform frequency, but that in certain groups they appear with an abnormal frequency distribution that can be predetermined. So the blue lines say how often the first two digits of a number in a financial statement should be likely to occur. The dark blue lines show that for this client, how often they are actually occurring. Straight away here, of course, we see an anomaly with the digits, with the sums beginning with 1-8. What we can start to do is look into that, and we can see that all of these transactions, or 50% of the transactions, are associated with a particular vendor, which will cause us to further investigate, and we can actually drill into those transactions. And in this case, drilling into those transactions would cause us to further investigate the documentation underpinning those transactions. So I think you get a sense of, in the financial audit space, how our auditors can now eliminate all of this highly intensive manual work to be more effective, how they can then repurpose that effort into conducting the types of procedures that, of course, they have had to do in previous years, but often, and the reality is, through work pressures, we've seen a dip in the use of some procedures, so it enables us to focus more on the heart of the audit. Of course, any efficiency and effectiveness in our organization is efficiency and effectiveness for you, because ultimately every element of inefficiency or ineffectiveness for us is something you pay for. And I think hopefully the appealing part in this whole program for you is that it is on both sides. If we're more effective, your staff are more effective, and you get a double win in terms of the outcome. As I said, we'll also seek to give you more and more insights. This is early days, but starting to show you some ratios coming back here. But even detailed insights, and in this particular example, we see that overtime by 5 individual employees actually equates to the ordinary wages for 1 employee. So that's the sort of insights that we'll seek to give you. And then in terms of future phases, we'll expand from 35 organizations in scope for this project to 77 next year. At this point, we don't have controls testing in the system, and we'll be able to bring in a number of tests associated with controls next year. We'll seek to acquire the underpinning documentation, so now we can drill down to transaction level. Our next step is to actually bring in the underpinning documents so our auditors can view the supporting evidence. And of course, like everyone else, one of the things we're doing in this system is we log every single movement of every click of the mouse, every single action by an auditor. That enables us to do 2 things. It enables us to understand that people are doing the work that they say they're doing, which is important for our needs. But more importantly, we can start to now use machine learning to preempt what our auditors actually do. We can say, for this client, over a number of years, these are the actions that the engagement lead, that the team leader and the team have done, and we can actually start to present that data to them. So this is really the strength, because all machine learning is predicated on volumes of data, and we're starting to gather this data early. And of course, we'll reach more and more into subsidiary systems to be able to, again, as I say, continue to augment the auditor. So that's our financial audit program. Later on, Ben Hasker will talk through the performance audit space. And I think most people in the room know that we really have 2 distinct product lines, financial audit and performance audit. We initially were applying the same approach in both domains, and we have shifted our approach in the performance audit space. We recognize that in financial audit, it's more efficient, it's more effective, it's empowering, it's visualizations is what we're seeking to achieve. However, in performance audit, we're about to hire our first lead data scientist, and it is much more of a data science view that we're seeking to implement. This is across all phases of the performance audit program: planning, conduct, and reporting. So before, and Ben will talk about how we originate our annual plan later, but the sorts of things that we do to inform ourselves for performance audit topics is, of course, we listen to you and we draw on a range of resources. However, we are again equipping our performance auditors with more and more insights into the sectors. We have powerful sector dashboards, for example, in local government. So we can fundamentally understand those sectors in more detail. Not only that, we're starting to use things like word clouds and word trees to be able to analyze things like social media, to be able to analyze things like Parliament's Hansard, to understand topics that need to bubble to the surface. So that's how we're using, in this case, not data analytics, but data science in the planning stage of performance audits. And the next stage we use it is in the conduct phase, and more we're starting to apply even more sophisticated techniques in here. And this is an example from a recent TAFE enrollment audit. What we start to see here is we're actually mapping the flow of students and student enrollments. So we're taking tabular data from the TAFEs that were subject to audit, and we're placing it into this process mining tool, a tool called DISCO. Straight away, what that enables people to do, Andrew Evans was leading this audit, a director in the performance audit area, and what it enables us to do is to start to visualize those bottlenecks, drill in and probe more. And this is but one example of the varied analytical techniques that we are using in the conduct of performance audits. Of course, like everything, you always end up clicking off the video and clicking off the presentation. And then finally, in the reporting phase of performance audits, what we have always committed to doing is leaving you with the data that we generate. So in the case of Vic Roads or hospitals or whomever, when we prepare dashboards, we are more than willing to hand across those dashboards to the clients. And secondary to that, we make more and more dashboards available on our internet. This is an example of a TAFE comparative dashboard, giving you deep insights into the TAFE sector as a whole. We have similar dashboards across a range of spaces. We have a local government dashboard, which combines things like Know Your Council data from the Performance Reporting Framework, combines data from the Victorian Grants Commission and other resources to bring it together and aggregate it, and that's available on our website. And this is, again, another dashboard, public-facing dashboard that accompanies our performance audit into investing in regional Victoria. The critical thing to know is these and other dashboards are always on our website. They are under the reporting section, and you'll see the dashboards on one of the first pages there associated with each performance audit. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how we're applying data science in our finance space, in our financial audit space. Data analytics, data science, very distinct from data analytics in our performance audit space. And of course, the last thing I'd like to talk through is how we focus on data protection. This is an area I'm particularly passionate about. I've got a technology background. I think it goes without saying that the sorts of data that we command and currently hold means that we need to have an environment that is second to none. And I hope as I talk through this program, you'll get some sense of what that environment looks like. I think it's highly relevant to Audit Committee Chairs to understand what our data protection environment looks like, because at the end I'll pose some questions that you might want to consider in your own organizations. So I won't list the data that we hold because it is probably something we don't want to disclose, but suffice to say we hold immensely powerful, personally identifiable data, sensitive data, and other types of data, particularly in our performance audit space. And our strategy from the beginning has been one of leveraging cloud. This is consistent with the Commonwealth cloud strategy and the state cloud strategy. We believe that the best way for us to provide a secure environment, and I think this would be commonly acknowledged, is to outsource most of the governance and control management associated with cloud. Now, I'm conscious that some people in the room, when they hear the word cloud, they go, "Ooh, that all sounds a bit scary." The first thing I guess I always talk about cloud is, and I know many people in the room will be across this, is cloud is merely a marketing term. If you have a server in your organization, it is in the cloud. Anything that is connected to the internet is in the cloud. But when we talk about cloud providers as a marketing term, we talk about these big global aggregators of technology. And there are only 3 really major players in the market. There is Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google G Suite. And what we see here on the left, moving across the top, is really we're going through a technology revolution. Left to right is old technology to new. And if you look on the left here, this is typical enterprise IT, whether you have your servers in-house or in a data center, that they are your servers. Your staff are responsible for all of these components and more of what we call a compute stack. So you have people managing the servers, buying the servers, patching the servers. As we start to take one step along, we start to outsource that elements of this to a third party. And a further step along, almost everything, the final step, everything is outsourced to a third-party provider. The way I like to think of this is, some people call this pizza as a service, if you want a good comparative. You can make pizza at home where you've got to provide everything from the table to the flour to the oven, or you can go on the right and you can dine out. And in between, you can go to the supermarket and buy a pizza, or you can have pizza delivered. Or another example is car as a service. On the left, you do everything. You lease a car, the leasing company takes care of some components. You hire a car, the hire company takes care of nearly every component. You get a taxi, everything is taken care of. But of course, the critical thing when we look at this is not buying a pizza, or this is not hiring a car. This is you putting every piece of your data in the custodianship of another entity. In our case, our journey has been, when's this, May 2018, we had 78 servers in that enterprise environment. As of today, we have a halving almost, or more than a halving, 38. And we say within 12 months, it'll actually be nearer 3 months, we'll further halve the number of services under our direct management. So that will leave us with a before state of 78 servers that we were managing, and nothing in any of these other environments. It will leave an after state of only 1 server internally, which is our building management system, our swipe card system. 19 servers in this environment where we have to do far less. And in the last 2 areas where we have to do nothing, 58, equivalent of 58 servers hived off to, in our case, Microsoft to manage. Of course, this delivers immense opportunity, but it also delivers immense risk. I'm sure you'll be really interested in the risk when we get to it. To put these providers in context, on the platform that we operate, there are 185 million users using it as of today. When I messaged Ben from over there on Microsoft Teams a few minutes ago to say, can someone tell Bill I need his lapel mic, there's 185 million people working on the same platform. Which means that all of these traditional experiences that you would get in your organizations, which I'm assuming are anything from 25 staff or maybe even less, up to a bit under 20,000 staff, they are dwarfed by computing delivery on this scale. So of course what ends up happening is we get an incredible end user experience, we get immense reliability, we get immense scalability of infrastructure. In our data analytics environment, we do things like we shut our servers down overnight, and because we pay on a per minute basis, and we scale them up rapidly when we need to do really sophisticated data analytics. These are all things that are beyond the traditional compute environment. And what we have done, I hope it's apparent that we have freed up an immense amount of administrative and transactional effort. Not that dissimilar to what we're doing across our business. I used the example in the financial audit space before. So what we do is we redeploy that transactional effort into delivering better end user tools to our users. So I mentioned Microsoft Teams earlier. Microsoft Teams, some of you will be using. It doesn't have widespread use yet across the sector, but that is the core of our day. We no longer use Outlook as the center of our world. We use Microsoft Teams from meetings, through to collaboration here on every audit, through to chat and information sharing. So it is a highly effective tool, and really the end result of us moving from enterprise IT through to software as a service is we can focus on delivering tools to our end users. That's one thing that we do. The second thing that we do is when you move to these new environments, there is a whole suite of data protection, data governance, compliance, and security tools that are open to you that are generally not available in a traditional enterprise environment. And if they are, they would be far beyond most organizations to actually deploy. So a huge amount of that resource that we have freed up in our information technology space, and it is hugely significant. If you think going from 78 servers to 0 servers where you've got to do everything, it is a huge amount of resource to free up. We have deployed that into data protection. So I'll use one example, and this is a very basic example. On the 28th of April, OVIC determined the new protective markings for use across the Victorian public service and sector. We had those markings deployed by the 10th of April, so just over a month. Most of that time was spent on developing documentation and training material for our staff. In real terms, it took us about 4 hours to actually deploy this solution. And what it enables us to do is to mark every document as it goes out. But of course, what we now start to be able to do is not merely doing kind of dumb marking of documents. We actually, in the back end, are able to report on how we're classifying documents. But we're also able to do things like restrict our staff from sending protected documents externally. We're able to compel encryption on official documents and so on. So we start to be able to leverage technology together, and I'm conscious I'll get into my whole geek world of technology here in a second and lose everyone in the room. But I guess the base message is, in these environments, we can rapidly deploy solutions, we can link them together, and most of those solutions are really data protection focused. There is one final thing to look at here. SecureScore is a reporting tool. It is by no means definitive or exhaustive, but it is a really, really good indication of your cloud-based maturity. Our current SecureScore, as you can see, is 470. The sector average for government is 37. So what this is an active monitoring of our controls, which I think is probably a good segue through to risk. As I said, these are the three global players. What you can see is Microsoft has been a late entrant into this market, but is gaining market share really quickly. In Australia, there is a certification service by the Australian Signals Directorate, and Google is not certified for protected workloads under that service. So you'll find Amazon and Microsoft are all prevalent in Australia. It probably doesn't take Warren Buffett to say this sounds like putting all your eggs in one basket. You are beholden to one provider, or maybe in the best case scenario, two providers. I think there's a harsh reality to this, and no matter what anyone says, even segmenting between these two providers, there is a simple reality that over the next 5 years, in the case of I think every organization in this room, you will no longer have the backup tape in the bank vault. Everything is online. So to characterize that, if someone compromises your global administrator's credentials, and I think if you look at some of our recent reports, particularly into security of hospital patient data, you can see how easy it is to compromise password data. It is incredibly, incredibly easy. If the credentials of a global administrator get into the wrong hand, someone can within minutes destroy your whole cloud environment, but not only that, destroy your whole backup environment. So I don't mean to be alarmist, but this is a real threat of very high consequences. And I think when Andrew touched earlier on the hollowing out of expertise, this is an area that I think is very prone to that, because what we're seeing is a shift from IT people that managed and maintained servers, bought hardware, understood networks, patched things, to a world where it is a whole new skill set. It is about being able to deploy tools that are entirely different to what we have deployed in the past. And there is a very real risk that people don't have the requisite knowledge to be able to manage these new tools. So while they have the promise of great security, something infinitely more than a traditional environment, the reality is if not correctly deployed, there is huge consequential risk. So I think, as I said, you can't globally avoid this. This is a $160 billion market. It's a shared responsibility model with the vast majority of responsibility outsourced, I think, to Amazon or to Microsoft. People are always, when our clients talk to us, and it's, we're in a very privileged position, that when you deal with 550 people, you get asked a lot of questions around data protection. It enables you to really think and reflect on your answers. I should say we have a data protection fact sheet that we can make available to anyone in the room that talks through how we approach this in a lot more detail. But people always want to know, how are you managing Microsoft? Can we go in and audit Microsoft? If I'm being entirely frank, they're not the people to worry about. It is not the outsourced vendors. Servicing 185 million users, Microsoft alone has about a $40 billion share of this market. They are spending $1 billion a year on security and compliance. They are not the worry. In any environment, it is your people, your personnel, your physical security, and I think most importantly of all, your information security that is at the core of this. I think another real risk is the reality is in any change process and in any paradigm shift, you're going to have a time when you're running two environments in parallel. The great tendency, of course, with people with inertia bias and status quo bias is to always want to hang on to the old environment. And I see this the whole time. I'm saying there's a new way of managing, for example, a thing called Active Directory over here. Why are we managing it in the old environment? I guess why I introduce this as a risk is that overlap period means you have more plates spinning than normal. So what I would encourage anyone in the room is to get through that overlap period as quickly as possible. So finally, and I put this slide up here, what would I ask? Please by no means take this as any sort of definitive list. But what I would encourage you as chairs, and what I would encourage audit committees to do, is to start to probe as people move into software as a service, as they move into infrastructure as a service. Start to arm yourselves with some basic questions around data protection. And the first question I would always ask is, MFA enabled on all devices for all users? Multi-factor authentication, sometimes called two-factor authentication. I'm assuming that most people in the room, when you log onto your device, you get prompted for a password, something you know, and you get prompted on your phone, what we call something you have, to log in. I presume you have multi-factor authentication in place. If you are one of, hopefully, the few people in the room that don't, that is a sign of immense immaturity in your environment, and that is a really, really good starting question. Just a signal, or perhaps an artifact of the maturity of the environment. The second thing is, of course, IT people are great for telling you everything's enabled or disabled until you actually go and get some evidence around that. So it's all devices, all accounts, no exceptions. Do you have BitLocker enabled? So do you have underlying encryption on all of your laptops to what we call AES 256? Have you started to deploy some of these new tools that are available? And I don't propose to talk you through them in any huge detail. But when you set up these environments, the standard thing is you configure things like lockbox, which means that Microsoft cannot enter into your environment even though they manage it. They physically can't do it. Have they enabled things like identity protection? Identity protection has 3 settings, high, medium, and low. Most environments you look at haven't even got it enabled. And identity protection enables basic things to take place, like it tracks unusual logins. So if you have a staff member log in here now, and in New York 2 hours later, it says there's an error here and it locks them out. We use a thing called Privileged Identity Manager, which is what we call just-in-time technology. So if I want to go and log in as a global administrator, I need to get another person to co-approve my logins. So these are the sorts of things, and as I said, not an exhaustive list, not a definitive list, but these are the sorts of things that I would encourage you to start asking questions about. I'd encourage you, Andrew talked earlier on about sensing the organization, and I'm sure you all do it every day, but perhaps you might want to apply your antennae to sensing the data protection environment, to really understanding when your CIO or your Chief Information Security Officer, if you have one, answers your questions, are they really answering them in a way that gives you confidence? Because as I said, we think about fraud risks and other risks. I hope I've illustrated to you that the downside here is very high consequence. So that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope you get a sense of how we're delivering a more efficient, more effective financial audit, performance audit, and how we have the underlying data protection environment to support that. And as always, might leave you with this little quote. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dave.